we know cities are growing in different directions, different ways. So many things are happening. Each city has their own challenge, and each city wants to tackle it in their own customized way. So here, we are really trying to understand how cities thrive over time, how cities manage themselves over time, how cities do innovative stuff in different directions, whether they deploy policies, whether they deploy technology, whether they give incentives to various aspects of urban development, or they tackle urban well-being, wellness, quality of life, human experience in different ways. So I think with this preface, I'm Vatsal Bhatt. I'm the director for Cities and Neighborhood at US Green Building Council, and it's my pleasure to be talking to you and with this panel as well, which is eminent speakers. And what I'm going to do is hand it over to them. They each will be speaking roughly for 5 minutes, and then we'll have a question. They can answer, a couple of them can answer it, and then we'll open it up to you all. So that we want to make it more interactive. We want to really start having you wake up, if at all you have not already. So with that background, let's just go ahead, and we'll start with Mr. Pandey.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. A very quick introduction of what I do so that you get the right context. I am the managing director for India's first smart city. You must be hearing a lot about 100 smart city mission that our Prime Minister is running. We are not there in the list of 100 because we are listed as a model city, example city. That puts tremendous amount of onus on us to keep ahead of the curve. A lot of infrastructure developments that have happened in our city have happened for the first time in the country. And that's one way of differentiating ourselves and also making sure that this entire story about urbanization is tackled reasonably well. So if some of you happen to be in that part of the world, you'll be able to see India's first district cooling system deployed at a city level basis. Essentially no individual air conditioners, no noise level, less maintenance, savings of power. That's also a city where you would see automatic waste collection system. So you kind of, there's, the vision says that we'll not see any garbage trucks in the city. So we have, every building is connected with chutes, and you throw it in, and the waste gets segregated, and it's sucked in at a speed of 90 kilometers per hour into a central collection system and gets treated thereafter. That's the first city in India where we have kept a very simple and basic promise of providing potable water from the tap. So you need not worry, if you're doing what you're doing in terms of living in the city. It's built on a classical model of walk-to-work concept. And likewise, I can go on and list all of the USPs that we have created, and we're leading the pack. The point which is relevant for today's theme in terms of the urbanization, since we have to set examples, one of the things that we'll be trying very soon, and maybe, I don't know in how many places it has been tried already. So while infrastructure is being shared by a lot of people, we are now beginning to tackle the issue of how do we manage the sheer growth. And I think that's where some of our colleagues sitting today in the panel would also jump in later on. We are also now beginning to create stories around affordable housing. And then we are saying, if the demographics are changing, things are changing, everything is becoming available on demand. The couples are becoming younger in terms of, at least as far as our part of the world is concerned. Are there pieces and portion of services that could be shared? So for example, you need not spend, time and money in terms of storing, let's say, consumables for your kitchen in your home. Can they be shared through a common shared services area? And you could pay for services that you use. If you require only 100 grams of a particular vegetable, why go and buy a minimum lot size of, half a kilogram or 1 kilogram? This is just an example to show that this is another step forward that we are beginning to look at in today's urbanized world to reduce congestion, to bring in things that, which is what we're getting used to through the app and through, if we can get transport the way we want, thanks to Uber and some of the other aggregators, if we are getting some of the other supplies at home, then why, even in terms of our daily needs and requirements and other stuff, why do we have to go the traditional way? So I guess what I wanted to leave you with this was, apart from my own introduction, that there are some pioneering things that we are beginning to do that may be relevant vis-a-vis what our theme of this section is today. So thanks, Vatsal.
Thank you, Mr. Pandey.
Those were
Yaron.
my introductory comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. So my name is Yaron Schwarcz. I have a startup that is focused on robotics and automation for the construction industry. We both develop our own technology and supply services to existing companies, helping them integrate robotics into their day-to-day activities. And I think more in the context of this panel, I work with the X Prize Foundation on creating the roadmap for the future of housing. What do urban environments and what does housing look like in 2050? And then kind of looking back from that point, what do we need to develop today and tomorrow so that we can get to that perfect future? And when I think about the topic of this panel, the issues that I am grappling with are income, and do we create universal basic income, or is it city basic income, or do we not touch that at all? When we look at growth of cities, how do we manage growth of communities in a sustainable way? How do we create cities that are not segregated but rather inclusive? And at least from my perspective, technology has a very important role to play in these developments. Less on the robotics and automation and autonomous cars and autonomous house and smart cities, and more on the ability to use technology, to use tools so that we can create inclusion and stronger communities within the building, within the group of buildings, or within the city level. And my personal perspective is that the future model for cities is actually going to be closer to what we've seen in state cities and polis cities back in ancient Greece, where a city can be completely self-sustaining without the need to kind of sit within a larger context of a country.
Thank you, Yaron. Lena?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I think the lunch was actually quite good. I'm quite sleepy, so you need to keep me awake. So I'm a Singaporean, but I work for the largest conglomerate in Thailand, Amata Corporation. We are one of the first few that have started the industrialization movement in Thailand. So the estate itself have actually contributed to 10% of Thailand GDP in the year 2016. It is a lot of hard work, from the working population of close to about 300,000. So we are not the government, but actually we function like the government. So to add to the topic itself today, when it comes to urbanized city, I would like to have a show of hand. I think everyone have been to Bangkok. I think most of you would have been to Bangkok. You would know that the traffic congestion, you like the massage, you like the Thai food. But, we are just 20 minutes away from the international airport of Thailand. So within that area, there are factories, production. BMW 5 Series is actually manufactured in our estate. Ducati is also there. Many of the big brands are there. So we, in fact, has provided a livable city within the area of Chonburi that create the jobs and employment opportunities for the people. So I give an example. For the GDP per capita of Thailand, the GDP per capita of Thailand is overall about $6,200 US. If you look at Bangkok, it's $15,100. If you look at our area that we reach now, it's $14,900. So people that work in the estate are happy. They are they're paid well, and they actually contribute to the livability, which we have the commercial, we have also the retail. So my question is, if you think of the city itself in terms of the development in Bangkok, so we will be like the best satellite city. Not about promoting what we do, but it's about how, from an urbanized city, how would we be able to create urban cities that will provide the flexibility of, within 10 minutes, you are away from your workplace. I think that is actually work, live, and play. So we actually also are spearheading a transformation towards a smart city. So I think just now, one of the audience actually asked about affordability. So if you talk about affordability, you need a place that is close to your workplace, that you only pay about maybe half, the housing cost that is available in Bangkok or any other cities, and then you get good food at 30%, probably from France, I think maybe only 20% if you get good food. But you can get actually very good food in Thailand, it's the same type of quality, of course without that ambience, you pay a little bit more for the ambience, but the same type of quality at a fraction of your cost. So think longer terms, right? How do you want to do? What do you want to do in terms of choosing a place to work, live, and play?
That's great. Bernise?
Yes. So my name is Bernise Ang from Zeroth Labs. We are a startup in Singapore. I'm also Singaporean, but I spend more time than Lena in Singapore. Although our work actually takes us to different parts of the Asia Pacific a fair bit. So what do? We essentially help mayors and city councils to figure out problems relating to things like waste management, sanitation, healthcare, things that any city experiences in its trajectory towards development, towards urbanization, right? And these problems are messy. So what do? We do two functions, basically. One is a bit of, sorry to be jargony, a bit of complexity modeling, right? It's bubbles and arrows, but what the bubbles and arrows show what are likely to be more root in the causes of this whatever problem that the mayor is facing, right? And with that, you get a strong problem definition, and using that, we do prototyping of new public services and citizen solutions, whatever the form might be. On the topic of thriving in the urban boom, I feel like it's such a complex topic, and see again the word complexity comes up because it's one of the lenses that we see the world through. How do we actually make sense of the different layers, right? One concept that I've actually been quite intrigued by is this thing called urbanization, so rural and urban. But what it actually describes, and this is developed by a Singapore architect, Tay Keng Soon, actually. And so he describes a concept where you have decentralized cells, right, that are, I guess you can call them cities or towns in their own right, but they are self-contained. So the services that you have, they're all within reach, and you also have a lot of the natural environment around you. So it's a model that actually promotes the protection of the physical environment, as well as you get all the benefits of modernity. And I wonder if we can actually get to a point like this. Am I being too naive?
No, I think you ended with a good note where we can get started. So I think there was a common theme that is running through all your discussions. You all come from different backgrounds, different offerings, different capabilities and all. So let's just touch upon very simple things. Technology is key part of what all you do in different ways. So cities need to always think about where they can put their best buck, right? So that they can get the best outcome out of it. When they invest in technology in all your different ways, what are the ways in which they can really justify it? Meaning, if at all you're putting up in a waste collection system, or that entire your operations center, or putting up DG, or putting up renewable. Similarly, all other discussions, Yaron, you're talking about robotics and all. So, and you are also doing so many different things. So point is, when we invest, when we tell cities to invest, what are their priorities? Because a buck invested is going to be locked in to that technology, that thing for years together. They could have been invested somewhere else. So it's a simple question. You can deal with that question in your own right way, and feel free to jump in whenever you can.
I think there are two levels of technology here.
Mm-hmm.
First is generic. Mm-hmm. So whether it's robots that build buildings or clean windows or wash our floors or deliver the trash, there are certain services and facilities that I would say almost all, if not all, cities need. And these are generic technological solutions that can be developed in one place and then implemented across the board. But as we know, each city is its own anomaly. And each city has its own unique needs and unique wants. And then I would say that for a city to invest in existing technologies, go for the generic. But if a city wants to invest in new technologies, then invest in the people that will develop the technologies that are specific for your city. So if there is a specific, let's say if there's a specific need here in Songdo, right? Let's say, and I don't know, I'm just inventing. Let's say there's a community of artists and they need an ability to communicate and travel and meet each other, right? That a need that exists only here. A city can invest in a specific network, or whether social or physical, to allow these this community to meet, aggregate, and create whatever they're creating, because at the end of the day, their creation is going to benefit the overall city, right? Because our city at the end is an aggregation of smaller communities.
Sure.
So that's how I think of
Thank
technology.
you. Let me twist that question a little bit more. For an example, tomorrow a city wants to invest in any type of robotics, or a city wants to invest in any kind of smart sensors, smart technology. Smart city discussion is very simple, as Mr. Pandey was talking about. But it has so many facets of it. So when a city wants to invest in it, what are their logics behind it? Where should they be spending their best buck?
I would just like to add on, right? If you really talk about technology, there is a certain phase where you start with the nascent phase, when you also go into the mass production or adoption. So there's always a demand and supply, especially when it comes to new technologies. So I give an example in our city that we are exploring with the EV, electric vehicle car, right? So we are actually attracting the manufacturers to manufacture the cars right in our estate. And then what else? You need to run the car. So you need the EV network, the charging network. So somebody would have to pay for the network. So how do you work on that financing perspective to introduce the technology? So with mass production, then it comes with the infrastructure. Then you also come to know about awareness, right? If the consumers are not using it, then the demand and supply, there's no match. If there is a match, so you have to do simultaneously for the adoption of new technology or smart city within the smart city, you have to encourage both demand awareness and also in terms of the supply, so that you can lower the cost and at the same time the take-up rate will be high. So that is our experience based on the electric vehicle.
Makes sense.
Just a quick one chiming
Go
in.
ahead.
So Einstein once said that if you give me an hour to fix a problem, I'll spend 55 minutes understanding it and then 5 minutes to solve it. So I think technology is actually an enabler and it can do whatever you want it to do, right? So but the key is in understanding what your problem is, and then you find the technology that will serve that purpose.
Makes sense. Mr. Pandey, you have invested in so many new technologies, and your city is considered to be a model for Indian smart cities. So would you want to throw some light on that?
Yeah, so I think the best thing is that I give you a specific example, and whenever you give this problem to engineers or finance team, they will get lost in what is called return on investment, and certain assumptions would be made, and I think thanks to Mr. Bill Gates, you have Excel sheet and it kind of spits out the numbers that you want to see. That's the way I look at it. But you need to look at what is called the value chain, and that's where I want to give a specific example. I'm sure all of you in this room would have heard of a company called Oracle. Now, Oracle is one of the major software players, and they opened up their development center in our city. And all of these technological innovations that we spoke about were solving A, B, C, D stated problems about waste, about water, etc. But you would be surprised how all of these technological innovations finally found their way in the entire value chain. So Oracle was facing a major problem in some of the other development centers across the globe. And I don't want to go outside India because it will be a different cup of tea in terms of comparisons. Within India, they were facing a huge problem of attrition. The problem of too much of traffic and spending less time with people. So they came up, they actually translated all of these engineering elements, technology elements, into what is called Employee Happiness Index. Right? The Employee Happiness Index then began to tell them, which they had a way to measure it, as to how much extra time the working employee is spending with the spouse and the family at home, because he or she was spending less time in commute. He or she was having water, which is a very good quality, so the health related issues were coming down. He and she were spending less, worrisome features in terms of where to park the car and how to and what to. So if you ask me, the real acid test was all of this technology. Engineers and finance team looked at return on investment, but look at it how Oracle translated it. Employee happiness index. And where is it ending itself? They actually announced it to be the 10th global development center of theirs, and they announced the expansion plan.
Amazing.
So in a way, city is getting benefit of those many extra jobs being created
there itself.
Okay? So some of these innovations that we do, we have to broaden the horizon to see, is it really touching the final value chain of the residents of the city?
Makes sense.
I hope I have been able to illustrate
Yes.
that with an example.
Yes.
To say that these technological things have to be looked at,
Larger.
little
Yeah.
bit beyond the very obvious set of things.
Exactly. Thank you so much, sir. With that, we would open up for any questions, probably a couple of questions, and then we'll get back to more questions here. Any questions here in the audience?
What is something that you've been struggling with at work? Is there a problem that you haven't been able to solve and you're wrestling with?
So I suppose it will be different for different people
Sure.
because the situation is different. In our case, as I said, because we are a greenfield story, so it's a question of when can you say that you have scaled enough to get that critical mass? And if you have not, you have invested so much of money, if the capacity is not getting fully utilized, you have a different kind of problem, which results into multiple little things. So I suppose it will be different for different people. So in our case, because we are a growing one, so we had 200 people 2 years ago, now I have 5,000, I will all of a sudden have 10,000 people. So it's a different story of how to manage that growth, how to manage that urbanization, which is what, there's no simple yardstick or a formula of X, Y, Z that could be tabled straight away.
Makes sense.
If I
Any other
speak on
thoughts?
behalf of the speakers, I think we all have sleeping disorder because we fly too much. But it's a very good question. I would say, if you look at it, I think talent. We need talent, we need competency in different levels, because when we are developing into smart cities, you're also going into the unknown, untested. And then in terms of cost justification. So who is out there who can actually provide the talent? Because you can get the talent. Second step is about retaining the talent, because talent moves very fast. So I think talent is what we require, and we really hope to attract more talent to work with us, and also in terms of working in the cities, because these are the people that will drive innovation. These are the people that will create sustainability in the whole value chain.
So let's get back here. And we talked about technology, talent, and what's keeping us up all the night. Now, driving more towards the core question that we had at the beginning of the whole thing. Cities are competing with each other. You have seen it quite often. You have seen there, and you all have provided solutions for that. So in their process of competition, again, technology becomes a big part of it. But overall, making cities more efficient is a big part of the discussion. How to make a city more efficient overall. And then second part of it is equitable and affordable. You all touched upon it at some point of time. Earlier also we talked about wellness during the day. So two-part question. One is making cities efficient, really do more, how perform better. And second is make it equitable. So how do cities balance this is my question. And compete, because that's the ultimate goal, right?
To first talk about competition, I think that cities haven't really started yet competing with one another.
Okay.
But in the very near future, when human jobs are less available and cost of living is going up drastically, then cities will start competing for talent, for people to live in their cities, for good people to live in their cities. And I think at that point we might see a new paradigm shift in the financial models around housing, where today we have basically rent and mortgage. What about a model that allows you to do vesting, right? So a city invites people and gives them equity in wherever they're living, so that they actually, the people invest, the community invest in the growth and the sustainable growth of the city. So that's one side of the competition that I think is soon to come. The first thing you said was making cities more efficient. I think one of the paradigms that we have to change is going from a human model that looks at humans as productive creatures to creative creatures, right? Because today, for the most part, I would say most people around the world derive their self-meaning from their employment. But in the very near future, they're not going to have that employment. Where will they derive the self-meaning from? So the less we put emphasis on productivity and production, and the more we put an emphasis on creativity and creation, I think the better equated cities are going to be, and the happier people are going to be living in those cities.
I love to build on Yaron's point. So I come from a country, Singapore, that has been very good at being very efficient, right, as a government. But in recent years, there's also been more conversation about what should our definitions of success be, right? And I think part of this is actually coming around, is it about success to begin with? What is the good life, right? So if we ask ourselves what is the good life, then we translate it for a city, what is a good city, right? I think it's essentially in a time where we are seeing more and more complexity again, and vulnerability, volatility. What we need more and more of are actually resilient cities. And so then what are the ingredients that will make resilient cities function better and serve their residents better, right? Then when you reframe the question like that, all your metrics of efficiency and whatever are targeted to serving the citizens in the healthiest system possible, right? So then I think that's going to be like the reframing of the question in the future.
I think both of you have reframed the question toward more wellness, to us, quality of life, human experience and all. So that's great. Any other questions from the audience, ma'am?
So I have a couple of questions for Ms. Ng and Mr. Pandey. I've heard a lot about smart cities creating jobs and being resilient, and also business model sustainability. How about environmental sustainability? Because I kind of hear it being ingrained in some of the comments about adaptation, about resilience, but maybe could you share a little bit more about how you view it and maybe how you implement it in your cities as well? Thank you.
Thank you.
I think in our case it is relatively easier because we happen to be from a greenfield story, so we were able to ingrain anything and everything that we are doing around this whole concept. For example, we are a zero water discharge city. We don't do that. We have, as I said, citywide district cooling system, which is 30% less consumption of energy and easier to maintain. We have solar energy as one of the key components of what we are doing. So likewise, in our case, it is easy to probably do some of this stuff. It is difficult to do it in some of the matured situations. You can't. These are few things which is, I would say, in an established environment, it is more of a cultural change for the people to adapt to rather than just a technology deployment. So particularly in the newer cities, it's relatively easy. That's what I would say. But you would have challenges as you're sort of going around. But the good part which we are noticing, and this I'm not saying about my city or my country or whichever way, having seen it globally, it is now becoming part and parcel of our lives, slowly and steadily. It's not, this question doesn't arise now, should we or should we not? I think everybody understands that we have to adapt to all of this. We have to adopt some of these things. Then the discussion has moved away from should we or should we not to a point where we say, how should we adopt? I think that's what is getting more prominence all across. So I may not have answered your question in particular about general smart cities, but those are my comments, having seen it all over the globe.
Thank you.
I
Any
think-
other?
Yeah, I think thanks, Joel, for asking this question because we have the policy on the zero waste discharge start from day one. And our estate is more than 30 over years. So if you look into the framework of any, even country, city, or estate, right? The basis of all fundamental in terms of execution is about policy. So you need to have sound policy. So from the environment perspective, we have always up here the policy of zero waste discharge. Meaning even within an industrialized city, whereby people do a lot of manufacturing, a lot of production, how can you implement such a policy to make sure that there's no damage to the environment and we coexist with the community? And you'll be very surprised to understand or even hear, actually we have one of Asia's best golf course, the 17th hole. There is an island green. I contribute a lot of the balls into the water, by the way, because I'm not a good golfer. But it's in our estate. So how do you actually have a policy that encourage, that refers back to your green ratio or your plot ratio. So we actually assign the plot ratio whereby at least 40% you allocate for the greening of the environment. You will see plenty of trees in our estate. We also have a lot of we're also planning on a marathon trail within the estate. So that actually creates the green movement itself, rather than just everyone is taking the car, everyone is taking the scooter. Why don't you walk, right? If you have a city that you are promoting as a smart city, then the smart people like ourselves need to walk a little bit, right? So that is the part whereby we, from the policy perspective, we create the green policy in terms of zero waste discharge, in terms of the ratio itself during the master planning stage. And then we also encourage to work with joint venture partners. So the recent initiative is to implement the solar rooftop for the factories. So hopefully, in the next 20 years, we can reach our target of 20% by renewable energy, either by solar, or by the waste to energy, or by other renewable sources. This is our dream in itself to
That's
accomplish.
very impressive.
Yes.
Very impressive. Please go ahead.
Both of you kind of took the question from if to how. And I would say that we have to talk about when. And when to implement should have been yesterday. And I think one of the biggest problems that we're facing is that we're putting goals for 2050, 2030. I'd want to see goals for 2018, 2019, 2020. Okay, that's far but pretty close. And I think the only way to do that is to rethink a lot of the models and regulations that we have in place. For example, the LEED code, and I'm sorry if I'm offending anyone here, in my opinion, isn't really a green code. It's a washover. And we see lots of LEED buildings here, and it's better than not having a LEED certification. But the fact that we have this washover certification means that we're not going into the deeper problem. And the deeper problem is looking at the cradle to cradle, the entire life cycle of everything we're using. And when we're talking about the construction industry, I mean, construction, think of it, it's taking material from one place, breaking it up, putting it through a process, putting it through another process and reconstructing it. This entire process is not ecological inherently. So if we want to truly think about our ecology, then we should be growing our buildings. We should be using sustainable materials that are not finite. We should be using local materials and local techniques to reach these goals that we've set forward for whichever point in the future.
Yeah.
So I think the discussion should be when, not if.
I just wanted to quickly pick up on Yaron's point again. So you mentioned cradle to cradle, and I think that's actually one of the things that we need to really quite seriously think about if we are serious about a more environmental future, a more sustainable future. But I think the future is not going to be in new green initiatives and tree planting campaigns, even though all of that is good, but that we need to think about how to redesign our engineering and manufacturing systems so that they are based on circular design. There is no waste because all of the output, it goes back as input. But this requires a very big paradigm shift. But it's not technologically impossible, right? So then the political will is the next question. Yes, and I'll leave it at that.
That's great. Any other thoughts or questions?
Abdul Tawab, I'm from Kabul New City and Barekab Economic Zone. My question is that how provide affordability, while it's really important to provide quality infrastructure, quality housing, and so on, how to balance this much investment on providing quality and affordability.
Good point. Any takers here?
The way I look at affordability or the future of housing is through three prisms. So you said quality and affordability. I also look at desirability. So I think it's adequate, affordable, and desirable. And I think that the point of desirability encompasses the two other inside of it. And so if we are creating units that are desirable for the population that we are trying to cater, they're going to be adequate and they're going to be affordable. And so I think the point is desirability. And of course some people say, oh, I want a pool in my backyard. Great, well you can't have it, I'm sorry. But for the kind of mass public, I think if we are logical and kind of common sense about it, we can draw a line and understand what is this line of desirability. And it's going to be different from culture to culture, definitely. But there are going to be commonalities. And I think this is what we should be aiming at, rather than affordability, desirability.
I think I read a report, I think from the States. I think they talk about the changing mindset of millennials, right?
Mm-hmm.
They no longer needs to own house, right? Like my generation, I would like to own properties. Now I think this generation, they are looking at more flexibility and adaptability. So they would not need to own the place, right? They need to own the car, right? You can go under the car sharing. So when it comes to the question of affordability, you need to understand the demand. Who are we talking about? So if you're servicing at this level of the millennials or people who like a little bit of more flexibility, then in terms of the housing or whatever that we are providing, we'll provide them with a leasing concept instead of a sales contract. So it really depends on how we are providing to the new generation in terms of the demand and also in terms of co-sharing space. In our estate, we are also exploring with people that are coming up with, the container. So container you can actually create into office, quick office setup. So you can actually create for incubators and promote for entrepreneurs. So there are many living examples, examples that is within the city of Thailand or anywhere else that are providing flexibility for the new generation.
Good point. Then let's now move on to some different dimension of it. You all have been working with cities, in different ways. Now, cities are again thriving, competing with each other. We're talking about jobs, but we are also talking about attracting businesses and all those things. So when cities want to really say, in simple terms, sell themselves, what is the key point? What is your story? What is the key story of a city in selling themselves? So for an example, let's start with Bernise. You talk to cities and try to find out, draw those bubbles and arrows diagrams to really understand what is the key point, what they need to be doing and all. So what is the selling story?
Well, I really feel that what makes cities come alive are the people that inhabit them. And why is this compelling? It's the stories of their lives, the stories of things that have happened in the city, the communities that live there, the bonds that tie the people there together, and also even digital bonds. I mean, people who are tied to the city but outside the city as well, and they maintain relationships. So it's not one story, I think, that is for a city to sell itself, but it's how interesting it is. And then of course all your basic stuff about livability, walkability, it has all of these basic things have to function. But beyond that, in the future, when everything that can be mechanized is mechanized, what is left of what makes us human, right? This is the essence of our people, our communities.
Thank you. Mr. Pandey?
So I firmly believe that cities will compete on some of the obvious things for sure. But I think in times to come, all the points that have been covered today about environment, about talent availability and so on and so forth, I think we have to very quickly recognize that we can't be anything and everything for everybody, right? Globally, I think people have to understand that as she was very rightly saying, that in times to come, it's going to be about communities. And so is the case for availability of talent. So what are we talking about? We are essentially saying you pick a place and try and create an ecosystem which is more amenable to the group of people or the businesses or what you want to create, so that the wives or the spouses are able to have, as I call it, the second career story.
Sure.
The availability of talent is there. There is a development story. When they meet in the evening, they know what they're talking to and who they're talking to. So infrastructure, etc., is fine, but beyond the point, in times to come, my personal view, very strong view, is that there will be cities which will begin to emerge as, specially recognized for a particular business, particular ecosystem, particular group of industries or services, and that's how it will begin to thrive. There'll be education required, there'll be technology required, there'll be talent availability. All of this encompassing will begin to, present itself.
Very interesting. Other thoughts?
I mean, at the end of the day, to me, is if you're really looking at building cities, cities has to fit the people, right? So what type of people are you trying to attract? Because it's not only for your locals, it is also for foreign expatriates. So that has to be created on an open mindset so that you can have innovation, you can have the execution, you can have the right framework, policies, plus in terms of the understanding of what are the future needs. Because any city development, whatever that I'm doing now, you can't see it, right? You will only bear fruit another 10, 20 years down the road. So we have to think of the really, the people who's ultimately using it.
Very thoughtful.
And kind of bouncing off that, I have a question rather than an answer. Today, developers are building cities, but shouldn't it be communities building the cities? Because we're trying to guess what people might want when the city is done, rather than saying, hey, here are some resources, go build what you want today.
Very interesting. Any other thoughts, questions from the audience?
My question really is that with a lot of things, we're impressed about so many things that have been said, and a lot of intelligence, a lot of experience that's been shared, and it's quite impressive, and I must commend everyone that's been speaking. But then, I want to ask, while we sit down here planning, there are people somewhere sitting down planning on how to destroy. And that's the truth. There's bomb going up everywhere in the world, round about the world today. So my question is this: while we're building these beautiful cities, what are we doing to secure these cities? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any one of you?
So I don't think there is a single silver bullet as an answer for this kind of a situation. You have to stay ahead of the curve, and I think from a security perspective, I think more and more cities and infrastructure systems, as well as the city councils, are deploying technology at every stage, both in terms of identity. So there is a physical security, there is a, if I may use the word, identity security, and so on and so forth. But I think the game will be won if you are a step ahead. And that's what everybody has to try for it. I wish there was a single answer to this one. It's a global issue. It's not my issue or your issue. But having said that, on an optimistic note, I think someday hopefully this cycle will, slow down, and the good things will begin to, hopefully, overtake this. Why are we doing this? We're talking about building better communities.
Right.
For what purpose? Only to have good quality of life.
Exactly.
And that should impact anybody and everybody. So we are hoping like hell that there'll be less people going there.
Right.
But you can't just eliminate it. So you have to stay ahead of the curve.
I agree. And I think just to add from my point of view is that we all need to get involved in that discussion. So not only city providers or planners or managers can provide it, we as citizens need to really act in it. We need to be active, we need to be vigilant. And like I'm sure in any big city, New York City, they say, if you see something, say something. So I think that's the simple point about us being more proactive. You were talking about planning ahead. Similarly, we all at least keeping our vigils up, not down. So I think that would be a great way to end this discussion. Any other parting thoughts? I think we are out of time, but still, I'll be happy to take any final parting thoughts.
Sure, I'll just give a last shot to on
Please.
your question.
Go ahead.
Which is, well, trying to think on the systems level, there are at least 3 dimensions, right, to tackle security. One is regulatory, another is technological, and a third is behavioral. With regulatory, I mean, it's security, defense, so I won't touch into that. It's technological, there's a lot of interesting stuff now being used, data that is being used to understand and geomap the activities that are going on to help us get a better handle of bombings that may go off that you can possibly prevent. And actually a lot of this tech is already being used, right, by defense contractors for different governments. But the part that we are weakest on is behavioral, right? We come up with policies to restrict certain things or like to limit certain kind of communities or peoples. Some of this is counterproductive to what we're trying to do. And I think, I would really love to see more policymakers really try to understand the irrational behavioral aspect of security issues, because this is not a traditional kind of war, right? We need to think laterally. And how do you understand this in the organic way that it is, because it is human behavior.
Exactly. Thank you. That's great. Go ahead.
Just add on to your question. I think that the kind of equilibrium between security and identity, so between group security and individual security. So the less privacy the individual has, the more secure essentially a group can be. And I think this is a very dangerous paradigm to be in, which is, in my opinion, where we are right now. So the more CCTVs we have, the more the more data we collect, the more data we analyze, the safer we kind of can project to our group or to our state or to our city, but the less privacy the individual has. And I think this is a very dangerous paradigm. And maybe just to say again, I think there is a specific answer to your question, kind of lending from Isaac Asimov's writing. And I would say that until we are all one consciousness, we will always have a security problem.
I just want to use a quote. I always remember, I don't work for Patek Philippe, but I always remember their quote, right? You don't own a Patek Philippe watch. It's actually for your next generation. So whatever that we are doing, whether it's policymakers, city developers, we have to think of the next generation. So even in the issue of security, you have to think ahead, right, of what will be the advanced threats and all this that will be involved in our planning.
Great. Well, with that note, we would like to thank you all for very active participation. So we would like to give you a round of applause, and at the same time to the panel here.